is garbage, and I'm going to try and convince you guys that it's not what you think it is. And we're going to try and explain what garbage is using some modern neuroscience. A lot of what was talked about in the last presentation is really relevant to this presentation. I'm going to go a little bit into addictions, and then we're going to try and tie it all together. So if we could move one slide forward. So first, before we talk about garbage, I'm going to give you guys a little quick reminder of what recycling is, because a lot of people just think that recycling just sort of happens willy-nilly. Maybe some recycling fairies, or more commonly the government. But ever since, let's say, 20, 30 years ago, the government started absolving themselves of that responsibility. And recycling is entirely market-driven. That is, before something is to be considered recyclable, a couple things need to be there. And they're all here. So first, somebody needs to be able to pick up your recycling, and it needs to be sorted effectively. Somebody needs to be able to process that recycled or that collected material into another usable material, which somebody needs to buy, and then use that material to make something that people want. So it's not enough to see the chasing arrows on the bottom of an object. It's not enough to say that paper is recyclable, because all of these new recycled or materials made from recycled contents need to have a market. And that's really, really important to understand. So what that matters, it's actually very important how we sort our garbage, what we do with our recyclables, because if there's too much contamination in the recycling, or there's too much contamination, that material stream no longer becomes usable and effectively goes to the dump. So, next slide, please. What is garbage? And I'm going to try to impose on you guys the idea that garbage is the most useful thing ever. And for a couple of reasons. One, it allows us to absolve ourselves of responsibility of just about everything. You can throw anything away. There are places in the world where people throw away people. And that's really, really disturbing. So what does it actually empower us to do when we can just, sort of like the mafia, make anything disappear? Well, we know from physics that nothing actually disappears. It goes somewhere. Away is the place. The way is usually a landfill, and that's a place of nature. The contamination there is huge. And what's happening nowadays is that the places where we send our garbage are being further and further away. The Cache Creek landfill site, which is used a lot in the Fraser Basin, which is the greater Vancouver area and surrounding area, is roughly 300-something kilometers away. So every single truck of garbage has to go there and back before they can pick up more garbage. Now, let's go a little bit more into the biology. Our biological systems are designed to want to take shortcuts. That allows us to save energy, to save calories. The more we need to think about something, the more we need to work to do something, we spend more energy, we spend more time, all of which is valuable. We have a natural inclination to want to do things as fast, as quickly as possible. And garbage is this amazing way that allows us to take the fastest, most efficient shortcut to just about everything. Now that means a lot of waste. So we go to the next slide. This is what I will tell you is an example of waste. This page in the highlighted bit there is from a textbook called Macroeconomic Theory. And it's from the chapter on externalities and public good. Now what I understand about this particular economic textbook is that it's the most widely used and most prolific in terms of advanced economic theory. That is, the professors that teach economics are being taught to teach economics with this book. Now what that means is that everybody who's ever learned economics will have had some exposure to this principle. Now, hard to understand out of context, so we'll read it. Second, note that all three approaches require that externality generating activity be measurable. This is not a trivial requirement. In many cases, such measurement may either be technologically infeasible or very costly. Consider the cost of measuring air pollution. Consider the cost of measuring noise pollution. These are things that are difficult to do. A proper computation of these costs and benefits should take into account externalities. Externalities in this case we'll just call garbage, waste. All of the things that happen once we decide to take that shortcut become externalities in the business world. So it says in this textbook, if the measurement is very costly, then it may be optimal to simply allow the externality to persist. What this means is, again, we get to take a massive shortcut. If something is too difficult to calculate, we can just ignore it. And right now we're living in a world where we're seeing the consequences of ignoring the measurements, and we're seeing the persistence of externalities. Pollution. Burning of fossil fuel creates carbon dioxide. That is an externality, the amount of carbon dioxide created. We haven't been measuring it, and now it's been increasing in our atmosphere, and pollution is a form of waste. I will argue that this very paragraph in this very textbook is the definition of waste, because it exemplifies perfectly the concept of taking a shortcut. And everything after you stop thinking about it, that becomes waste. Next slide. So, I think if you guys have been here for the past 2 days, there have been a couple sort of trends in the way that the talks have been going on. We've had a lot of people talking about being mindful, being present, sort of a spirituality type of thing. We've had a lot of people talking about our bodies and how the way we feed our bodies feed our mind. The previous talk was a very good example of the way we treat our bodies and how we treat our minds makes a very, very big impact on what we're capable of doing. Modern cognitive science, modern theory of mind is blowing apart everything that we previously knew about ourselves. A lot of what happens in our day-to-day life takes place beneath the conscious level. So that means that a lot of the things that affect us, we're not even aware of them happening. And we, according to our conscious mind, and because we exist a lot of the times in our brains, we'll look for a way of explaining that using our brains. And a lot of times, because the problem is not in our brain, it's in our body, we're effectively misdiagnosing the problem. And that also creates waste. Some examples of this in contemporary literature are Blink, Malcolm Gladwell. That's where he talks about the ability for people to think do very, very complex calculations within the blink of an eye. Consider a race car driver making that perfect maneuver around a corner. That's of course built up, but he's not doing that consciously anymore. That's his body reacting to a road. That's how people are able to calculate and do these things very, very effectively. Next, Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. He posits that we actually have two ways of thinking. We have a very slow way of thinking. You can imagine this as doing arithmetic very methodologically, very, very intentionally. And we have very fast methods of thinking, which are what your brain is doing right now as you listen to the words that I'm saying. You're doing an intense amount of calculation that is all happening subconsciously. You're not aware of it, but we all definitely enjoy the benefits of that. There are also many, many cognitive biases. Who has seen that image on Facebook where there's a picture of a dress that, depending on how you look at it, changes colors? Anybody? Got a couple head nods? It's one of those, it's a very common visual illusion, and there are many, many visual illusions like this, and they're all in some way related to what's called a cognitive bias. Now this just happens because of the way our brains are wired. We automatically sort of tend to calculate things in a certain fashion. And that is largely irrespective of what we think. And further, what we believe we think about something. So even if you think about it, you're probably still going to be wrong. Now, that's what I mean by illusion. A lot of what we believe about ourselves are incorrect, yet we maintain these beliefs because it just so happens to suit us. Now, I'm going to say that the concept of waste functions at this level beneath our everyday intellectual lives. We believe that waste is garbage that's just thrown on the ground. It's something that we should do away with, out of sight, out of mind. It's a perfect analogy here because waste functions at that out of mind, out of sight level. It is indeed a habit that we've created over a very long period of time. We can go to the next slide. So there's a local doctor in Vancouver, his name is by the name of Gabor Mate, and he does a lot of work with people in this neighborhood in the downtown east side, and he tries to treat addiction using methods in the body. So what he says about addiction is It says anything subject to craving, anything that gives you pleasure and relief, something that has very long-term consequences, short-term gains, but that we just can't stop. So how many of us in the room have felt really, really good after just like wiping your entire table, throwing everything in the garbage, and feel like you're starting new? Or, for example, when you feel like something is way too old and you just want to get rid of it, and you feel good once it's gone. That's this happening inside your body. Now, it's fairly well known that it's very difficult to change people's perception about garbage. It's one of those things that needs to be legislated. We need to be forced into separating our organics from the rest of our garbage. And that's the reason why we need to be forced to do that is, again, because our habits of throwing things away have been happening since we've been a kid. We've been told to throw it away, we've been told that's garbage, get rid of it. And those habits have been persisting with us for our entire lives. And that is, in effect, according to this definition, an addiction. Different kind of addiction than smoking cigarettes. There's a little bit less of a understanding about this kind of addiction, but it functions at the same level. So, next slide. What does this all mean? What does this mean for the way that we think about garbage? So it means, what I want to ask you guys to do a couple things is whenever you buy something, before you buy it, ask yourself, how long is this object going to be in my possession, or part of this object going to be in my possession before I throw it away? So whenever you see something, look at it, is this thing garbage or not? How long before it becomes garbage? And like that you can slowly perhaps start to train yourself to recognize what's happening at this level, because maybe you keep on buying something that you only use for a few minutes. The best example are one-time use cutlery, one-time use foodware, things that we get from restaurants. They become garbage immediately after we use them, and we don't think about it. In fact, we almost expect it. And that's this addiction happening, this subconscious processing of information that we've been doing for so long, we've become blind to the fact that we think it's normal. So what does this mean? What does this all mean? This means that whenever we think about garbage, we need to remember that it's not an object. Garbage is the result of somebody, at some point, taking a shortcut. And that we can perhaps, through self-awareness, through increasing our ability to be in the present moment, catch ourselves in these moments where we're making these kinds of shortcuts, where we say, I don't want to deal with the rest of this anymore. That's the moment where you've created garbage. And if we want to stop creating garbage, if we want to stop ourselves from overrunning this planet with garbage, then we need to become much more aware of what garbage actually is. Garbage is in the mind. Garbage is something that we all create. Garbage is something that we're responsible for. Garbage exists because people keep on eviscerating themselves from this responsibility. And if we take it back, then we can actually do something about it. I don't know how much time I have. Okay, so that's all I pretty much wanted to say. And that, yeah, questions, clarifications, shoot.
You know, what your talk makes me wonder, for example, if you think of ecology.
Yep.
There's no garbage.
Exactly.
The delicate interconnections between living things and physical environments and forces at play, that concept of garbage is not going to be there. Energy and waste becomes something else. So I'm just wondering, you know, your statements and thoughts about garbage, you know, it's a concept built on, is it a concept built on a hierarchy where humans are at the top of the hierarchy or God's dispensing garbage? Or, you know, I'm just wondering if there are other ways that we can think about it to deal with this issue. Because you've presented garbage as an addiction model, which is another aspect that's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
Like I'm speaking for myself, I had a situation where I had life's work, and I had to move, and I had to make decisions that I wanted to keep. I've been going through a process like that for a number of years. And there were things I wanted to keep because I wanted to write about them this week. remarkably, everybody that came, some people were offering me more money than I was asking for these.
Isn't it interesting about garbage? People sometimes will pay you to take it from your hands. So what does that say about the value of garbage? What does it say about the existence of garbage, right? So if I understand you correctly, you're asking about...
I'm asking about ways to think about it.
Yeah, to take it out of the... I mean, one way of looking at it is addiction. That's just one way,
You've got a lot
right?
of dysfunctional models that we can accept. And what I'm saying is, are there other ways?
Sort of a more accessible way. Well, yeah, because largely in ecology, we consider waste as a matter of semantics. Because it'll be waste only in the sense that something doesn't come and eat it afterwards, or something doesn't come and take it away and use it afterwards. If it manages to stay there in its unused form for long enough, it could be considered garbage. The modern saver example of that has to do with the circular economy, or what's called industrial symbiosis, or industrial ecology, which is where we take a very accurate taxonomy of all of the inputs and outputs of a particular organization, and then map that in relation to other organizations that exist in close proximity to it. So you imagine a paper and pulp and paper mill. That could be a tree, for example, quite apt relationship there. And then right next to that happens to be a company that makes engineered lumber. So in this case, a lot of the excess waste and pulp from the production that can't be used, the sawdust and all that sort of junk, can then go directly to its neighbor, who will be able to use it and turn it into another product, in the sense of eliminating the waste outputs of that organization. In my view, that no longer becomes waste as soon as you give it another use. Waste is something that we don't have use for anymore. If somebody else can make use of it, another man's garbage is another, one man's garbage is another man's gold. We've got all these amazing colloquial expressions that perfectly describe this scenario that happens. Yet we don't give enough importance to it because garbage is this thing that nobody wants to deal with, and by definition, we've made it that way. Is that a good answer?
Yeah, I'm just like, there are so many different ways to explore it, and if we could look at it as and figure, at a higher level with our civilization, we could probably, find something other than addiction.
Well, addiction, but the thing is, the great thing about addictions is it is very, there's a little bit of a negative stigma associated with addiction. Nobody wants to recognize that they have addiction. But any habit that we've formed in our early childhood becomes an addiction in our adult life. That's part of the work that Gabriel Mante has been doing, is to sort of make that okay. That we all have and carry these habits and addictions with us, but we don't associate them with drugs or with bad habits. We have added this extra category that allows us to separate ourselves from it, that allows us to say, no, it's not me, that's somebody else. So again, that's in effect creating waste because we're skirting responsibility. We're not saying that, oh yes, we do have an addiction, oh yes, we do need to solve it. A lot of people have made the argument that we have an addiction to fossil fuel. And I think that argument is very valid, but again, it does keep people at arm's length. But I think that actually is part of the illusion that I was talking about earlier, because if we bring it into ourselves and we take control over it again, once you know you have an addiction, you can take steps to remove it. One other thing about addiction that I should mention, a more recent study, whereas if you give, there's a lot of experiments with rats in cages, and if you give a rat water with a particular kind of drug in it, he's in this tiny little cage, he'll actually just keep on drinking that water until he dies. However, and we know this by correlation with humans as well, if you give a rat a huge cage where he has room to move around and play and other rats to socialize with, that same experiment becomes invalid, because that rat has a much more rich social experience to go back to participate in other than that drug. So you can consider that with humans who live on the street. That's the cage that they live in. I'll go back to that. That's the cage that they live in. People who use very addictive substances for pain, for example, painkillers, morphine in hospitals, people are on morphine for months. Once they're released from hospital, they go back to their regular lives, and very, very, very seldomly start to use that drug in its other forms available on the street. Same example. You give a human a really bad social environment, really starve them of social interactions, of ways to use their mind, they will keep on using and abusing until they die. People who don't have that environment very easily break out of that addiction. So we do this. We break out of addictions all the time.
I was one interesting person I found.
Sorry.
Oh, I
Oh, did that we run out of time?
I'm sorry, I didn't really know. There's two more. We're already.
Who's the next speaker?
Michael. She's next. I have to get time.
Yeah. Okay, well then we can totally talk about it after. I love talking about this stuff. So then, thank you very much, guys.